Ladies and gentlemen, Crow's Nest number 11, the fourth race. That's right, Veek is here to talk with me about the Askosi. But first, we'll talk a little bit
Welcome.
about what we've been up to. And of course,
Yeah.
at the top of all of these shows, I have to say, and it is kind of topical because I just sat down all of my taxes. For the first time ever in my whole life, I actually have to pay some taxes because of the hobby income, right, from the coffee page. But if you want to offset that loss, you can donate on coffee. Or if you just want to support the
Yeah, pretty
development.
cool.
Pretty epic.
And unfortunately, I have my mic on the warranty, so my quality may not be as good as usually. That's fine. We still want to have this episode,
Yep,
and it will be a shorter one.
that's right.
So we decided to talk about the design, like uh, I don't even know how you describe it, but
The core
yeah, the
design of the
difference,
Askosi,
like
essentially.
design differences and
Mhm.
whatever, like the thoughts on that, on the whole partnership thing. We'll
Oh, yeah.
discuss it the next time,
Yep.
and we'll mostly focus on Askosi, like you said, and we'll also want to do a recap because there were some exciting things. Unfortunately, not much progress on Kairos, mostly because my focus was elsewhere. That's still something I want to do, something I will focus on when the epic thing is done. And the epic thing is the launcher,
That's right.
and it's almost ready, which
Yeah.
is pretty epic.
The idea that like before, maybe even before this first week of this, it's a weird thing to say the first week of February because, I mean, technically it is, but it's not the first full week. But I would say probably in the next couple of days. Yeah, you think it's about that close, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I just need a few days where I can dedicate some time, and it should be good. Most of the most important setup is already done,
Yep.
and I decided to use Rust for this because Rust is very easy to unlike high level things too quickly. So
Yeah,
we'll see
it's
how that
funny.
goes.
That's what Python was
Unfortunately,
always described to me as, but I hate Python.
yeah,
So,
Rust is weird because it's like I feel like it's like a weird blend between C++ and Python actually because it has a lot of like conveniences of Python but also has a lot of low levelness of C++ and it
yep.
also has some of its own ideas. I think the toolchain particularly is pretty good because it has like documentation tests and like
Yep.
dependencies built in, so it's definitely less painful to do like UI in it, which is interesting. Anyways, uh, the unfortunate thing about the launcher though is that it currently uses WebView, which is kind of sad. It's not exactly like shipping Chrome, but it's like using WebView from system or something, so that's kind of sad.
Does
But
that mean you'll be
we'll
able to hit F12 to inspect?
I
By the
don't
way,
think so, but
you can do
I
that
saw that you
inside.
can control F, which is weird.
Oh, interesting.
That is kind of empty. But I know the lib I chose. Yeah, I decided to choose something and work with it
Yep.
since we want this like MVP thing.
Yep.
And we just want to have something so we can share it to people, and
Well, think
it's
about it,
better
right?
than
Like
nothing.
you've been
And
saying for a while that you wanted to like. There's some people that you are aware of that. I think you even said that there's like a Polish streamer or something that you're
yeah,
interested
yeah,
in, sort of like providing the project to, and it's like you can't, in good conscience, like sit there and be like, "All right, dude, prepare for your
yeah.
next half hour to technically set it
I
up."
saw this Polish streamer I used to watch
Yeah.
back in the day. It kind of really started my hype with RTS
Oh, interesting.
that I
Okay.
actually think about it, but at least from the competitive side, because I
Yeah.
used to be like a casual campaign player or whatever,
Right.
and then yeah, he inspired some passion to play competitively, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I was looking at him like play those like new StarCraft 2 campaigns with like inverse thing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
they're like kind of not really that great.
Right.
And I was thinking that, oh, if he like played CMBW, what would the experience look like? And
Mm-hmm.
there would be like the tech savvy setup, which is probably
Yep.
fine, but then like what content do you play without like committing 10 hours first to like learn the tech tree and
That's right.
whatever? Like I'm not sure how you onboard people yet.
Well, that's
And
almost
it's
like a good
also
topic for another crow's nest because onboarding is a huge
yeah,
subject.
yeah,
But I
yeah, yeah.
agree that at the very least getting the launcher to automate, like, so that they don't need to become Masters League at,
Dude,
you know,
and yeah,
computer handling.
I watched him like play Stormgate, and he's like, "Oh, I don't really like heroes because they are
Yep.
too much attention grabbing and too much power in one place." And then there are people in comments saying like, "Oh, this game is actually pretty shit or whatever." And
I
it's pretty
honestly,
cool because
yeah.
it seems like people would actually want to play like CMBW if it was more accessible.
That's right.
So I think there's a lot of potential with that. I'm
Yeah.
pretty hyped for that.
Yeah. So that's a big
And-
deal. The focus on getting the launcher out there, getting the project
Yeah.
in front of people. Because, you know, Vik and I had this conversation in DMs pretty recently, but I think it's worth sort of broadcasting here as well, is that we've put in so much effort, you and I, and many other people in the community. We've put in so much effort to make this the thing that it is. And while it's not in what will its final state be, obviously we're going to be talking about a pretty significant portion of what CMBW will be when we talk about the fourth race. But it's still very, very much clearly, I think, for my money, for what I'm looking for, it clears Brood War, it clears StarCraft 2, it clears all of these other RTS games. Definitely clears like the new one, Stormgate.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
So
yeah.
even though
I have my misgivings about the scale and pacing, but outside of that, it's really
you can just tell, like, even though it's not where we want it to necessarily be, perhaps there's just it's like clearly the superior option. And the problem that we're stumbling on is not that we've made something that isn't good enough. It's that we haven't been able to figure out a way to communicate to people that, hey, this is actually really epic. And part of that, so it's like an awareness problem is one of them, is like not very many people are aware. And the other part is that of the people who are aware, if they try to get it set up, well, it's very obtuse to try to get it in. There's a high barrier of entry.
There's high barrier of entry. Exactly what I wanted to say. That's one thing. And the other thing, there's not enough content right now.
Yep, that's another one.
We always wanted more, and we tried making multiple campaigns. Even together, you obviously had more attempts than I did, but we tried to ship to touch the sun was like the pivot point from like it was like sort of when we resurrected CMBW. I feel like because there was that point where we were trying to ditch it, and then we decided to commit one more year, I guess. But now this is the one final year, so we'll see where that goes. We'll see.
And you never know. We might get pulled back in, but I'm pretty sure. I think we can accomplish everything that we want to accomplish in this. So we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. But I think the launcher represents a huge step. Is sort of like the underlying point here is that. Getting to the point where I'm working on content. That's actually one of the things that I'm really happy about with Mapcrap. And obviously, recently, in between.
I don't think last time
I think we talked about it, but we didn't. In between the last one,
we didn't really have it, and it started. I hosted the event with $25, and a lot of people actually committed to the prize pool. So
it's very cool.
It's cool to have people in, and it's kind of late now to invite you, but if you have not heard about it and you want to participate,
hey, you got until the 14th of February, dude. That's enough time to crap. Yeah, if you can't crap in 2 weeks, you got it constipation. So see a doctor. No, I think the main thing that I would say is that it's sort of like this initiative where even if we don't get that many people immediately on board or whatever, if we keep running those every now and then, and if they're a month longer or what have you, then I'm certainly going to see if I can spend the time to build something out each time, and assuming it's once every other month or however often we do it. The other thing is it's really cool to obviously see that people are still badgering me specifically, hey, when's the next tournament, hey, when's the next this, when's the next that. So it's definitely still interest for it, but it's just going to get so much easier to I can distribute this to pros. I can go up to the semi-pros or the amateurs on Twitch and be like, hey guys,
it's just if you can have one EXE and that's it just works. It's great.
Yeah, we need to Todd Howard this shit. Make it just work.
And this is version 2.0. Version 3.0 will actually have lobbies and stuff. So
yeah, that's pretty. Almost like Shield Battery, but better, I would imagine. So.
Yeah, that is the plan.
Yeah, for those
probably the first feature of 3.0 would be chats, because that's a proof of concept for the whole infrastructure. And then once that's done, adding in lobbies and stuff should be pretty straightforward.
Yep.
It's just some integration with Brood War, and we're good to go.
And that's going to be really nice for a number of reasons because it circumvents the most painful aspect in many ways of editing Brood War, which is its stupid UI. So really nice to be able to not
so
have
my
to worry
idea
about that.
is that eventually, if we have Launcher 3.0 developed enough, we could even like ditch main menu from Brood War completely, and you would never have to interact with the UI outside of the launcher, really. And
it's sort of almost like, in a way, you can compare it to how League of Legends works. At least I haven't played recently, so I don't actually know. But I assume they still have the client, and then you load into the game after that.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like what we're talking about, is being able to get everything edited. I don't.
That would actually be pretty epic because not only that it guarantees that when someone hosts a lobby, you will also automatically have the version that they have.
Yeah.
And it's also huge for like modding, because if people want to have their mods, they could just upload them and people would automatically synchronize them, which is pretty unheard of.
It is, yeah. I guess the thing is that we would probably want to use the same repo, like logic or whatever, for downloads. If it's because I'm thinking of like Trenches, which is this custom campaign 3Crow made and released in between this episode and the previous one. It's 5 missions long, and he's making the 6th one for Mapcrap. So in 2 weeks' time, it'll actually be out, and you can play the 6th one. I don't know if he's planning on continuing it afterwards, but either way, he made this, and it's like each map is like 100, 150 megabytes because it has all this audio, and so you
that's
can't
one
distribute
thing that I
that.
was suggesting today is that would it be cool to have like a crig, which is command trig, which is command trigger.
Yeah.
Crig.
A
new crig for loading MPQs. That would be really good. Because then you could have like you could imagine trenches.mpq, and you would just add the map start loaded. And
it would have all the audio files, presumably.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could keep the audio files in the map too, but I like the idea of decoupling the audio from the map, because you edit the map like the actual layer or triggers within it or whatever. That's like layout stuff,
and also reusability between them.
Yes, yeah. Well, because this is something I've thought about for a long time, Vic, is that I always wanted to have these missions where I'd have like a character who's like your AI ally, and they have this suite of things that they will say. And sure, there's going to be some per map like bespoke lines where they specifically say, "Hey, I'm gonna go around this object and attack this way," or whatever, right? Like this as an example. But there's going to be a lot of ones that can be reused, like getting ready to expand. Like that one doesn't need to be map specific, you know. He might specifically say getting ready to expand by this landmark, but like if he just wants to generically tell you that he's getting ready to expand, I could use that in 10 different missions, like any mission that has this guy, right? And so.
Sure.
Like, reusability would be great.
Crigs are something that are kind of been used a lot lately, and it's kind of epic and kind of sad. It's kind of epic because it's the first time they're used, but it's kind of sad because they're so terrible. I didn't know what I were doing back then, and I'm way better at writing like parsers and stuff, and I just would want to move to Kairos already because a lot of things would be easier and less dumb. But yeah, pretty cool that people are using it, and we're discovering some things about it, I guess. And it's really cool that people are getting active. But I guess the timing of Kairos is kind of unfortunate that it's not already out.
Well, that's okay. It's just how it is when you have map crap, and now people are joining to build UMSs. Like we've got some guy.
It's funny because instead of like focusing on map crap, people are randomly doing UMSs. But
they're doing that.
Listen,
that's the spirit of map crap. They're doing shit that they've worked on for like 1 day or 6 hours or something, and then they popped it out. So
and then Kian just ships 12. By the way, UMS maps.
That's crazy. It's good. I mean. That's content, even though it's not the content that you and I are necessarily really hyped about for like, oh yeah, I want to play campaigns, and like that's not going to catch most people's eyes. If there's like casual shit for people to play when they're not necessarily as interested in playing the RTS,
I think it's pretty cool when you have like cat and mouse or whatever. It's
I personally,
especially if we can support it better.
Yeah, I have a feeling that like okay, there's a thing that gets me about mods or like custom game modes or whatever that are clearly not the standard gameplay. Of the like, they're clearly not the RTS. And the thing that I have a sort of a stumbling block on mentally is that like, surely the game that I made, is supposed to be good enough. And which is not to say that you can't, like, I'm sure there's something fun about taking stuff that you have as a system and then thinking about how can I like repurpose that for a different kind of game, different gameplay altogether. The problem that I would imagine that comes is that you'll end up getting into a situation where people are playing the game not because they want to play the game, but because they want to play a custom within that game. And that's basically what happened with Dota in Warcraft 3,
sure, right? I think the thing with that though is when you're just playing competitively and you want to like wind it down, it's useful to have like a dumbed down version of the game that is just like fun and goofy, and maybe less skilled friends can play with you.
Yeah.
I think that it's all good to
and,
have
and
that,
you can have co-op or game modes or whatever where one guy can carry, and that's true as well. But
right.
like I think
The stakes are not as high, which helps people to wind down.
Yeah, I would say so. So yeah, all in all of the stuff that we've talked about here, it's pretty exciting stuff for sure. Like it kind of goes without saying that we're getting to that point where we feel like we can support different kinds of gameplay. We feel like we can support more, customs, more experimentation, and we feel like we can eventually get to the point where we can support more people because we'll have the launcher. There is still the technical note of we need to figure out a replacement for Radman, because I would be surprised if we're not already at the capacity right now. Actually, like we're probably pretty close. So that's like something that we have to figure out. Is that
I wonder if we cannot just set up like a private. I was thinking if I wouldn't want to buy like a VPN or something, VPS or something, and then like setting up a VPN on that maybe would be possible. But then I guess routing every like everything through one server is still banned, even if we are not using like the PvPGN
one
server.
Yeah.
If we still have to connect to like a virtual LAN on a server somewhere, it still might be laggy. I don't know.
It would be less.
Not sure.
There'd be more points of connection than just.
It's sad because Radman is just like not. They just say that it's 150 is the capacity and it will never change, and you cannot even pay us for it to change.
It's not even. It's a free utility because they don't even ask for money for it because they have like another business or whatever, which is pretty cool. But like we've definitely benefited from that. But it is something that hampers our growth because you can't indicate that a user is a manager. I installed it on like a different computer, and that computer is now my brother's computer. And that computer was reformatted, so it doesn't even. I know there does not exist an owner of the network, so I can't just go around deleting expired people. And even if I could, it's still.
Well, the way you, I guess, protect against this is by making multiple people admins or have multiple devices as admins. But
yeah, I don't know if that was even. I guess that probably was possible, but
it's possible. I'm pretty sure.
I reformatted it as I was building my new one, so there was no hope for that. So owned. But all in all, we will figure out a solution to that, and that's pretty much that's from my perspective the only thing that's still like a question mark about the new launcher or like the new distribution is like we currently have 9 slots available for new people in the server, so it's like for the Radman connection thing. It's like, okay, now we can get 9 whole people to use this launcher. So not very useful if we're still gated behind that. So we definitely need to come up with a different solution. And I would like something that at least is as performant as what Radman offers, which unfortunately the PvPGN server wasn't. But maybe we can get out more more powerful.
And we are also not interested in like malware like Hamachi or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's no bueno. So hey, honestly, fuck it. If you guys know something that we don't about that, feel free to send us suggestions.
And don't tell us about zero tier because we already know and it's not that good. Yeah,
well, whatever people think of for the solution to that.
I think it was something. I don't know. There was something I think Lucy sent or someone.
If you look in, it was
that was pretty
Special Bus.
Was it like free VPN or something?
Yeah, it's in Special Bus somewhere. So.
Yeah, so that I think that looks pretty promising, although it requires some setup. So we'll see. We'll look at look at that.
That'll be something that basically once the launcher is good and ready, we can think about like, okay, what else do we package with it? Because we already packaged the clean Brood War install with CNC draw pre-configured, although we're going to look at that configuration again, and we're going to also make sure that there's like we split up the repos so that the maps are separate from the versions of the game, which is probably just a good thing overall because it means that if I update a map, you don't have to like update your whole game version or whatever. in order to get that update. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that's.
It's funny
just
because
be
it will be trivial to download the zip and unpack it. And I had that mentality for a few years, and then like basically use no code and write everything yourself.
Yes,
and like doing that would be really essentially impossible because I would have to like re-implement compression or something. And I guess 7Z is not proprietary, but yeah, the chance I would do that, like I would be taking 1 month to write that, and for no benefit, and it will also be not more robust and not more performant probably. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, it's good that you referenced it earlier, the MVP. That doesn't stand for most valuable player, although you can think of it like that. It's minimum viable product, and it is definitely a situation that you and I have both started to embrace, like that sort of mantra of let's just get something out there. It's way easier to iterate afterwards. So, very cool stuff. I figure now that we're about 20 minutes in, you figure it's a good time to. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to mention about the launcher, crigs, anything else we've been up to, or if you wanted to just dive into the next topic.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Let's go to Askosi.
All right, let's talk the fourth race of Cosmonarchy Brood War. Yes, we're going to do a fourth race. Yes, they are going to have the same number of, roughly speaking, units and structures as all the other races because we are madmen. It is the Askosi. The Askosi are sort of like cybernetic bipedal lizard people. Very interesting, very cool. Everybody's a fan. And they are... I guess the first thing that people will probably think of them as is like their architecture and stuff. It's going to be a bit more shapely than Terrans, but it will be the most like Terrans because it's, material, it's metal, it's, it's not like the golden stuff from the Protoss, and it's not like the organic of the Zerg, right?
It's interesting. The first thing you're saying about them is how they look, because I was just about to say that I can't really picture how they will feel without seeing how they will look.
Yes, yeah.
And yeah, I think that is definitely a big factor.
Well, the more Tothrakor graphic from way back can be their worker as a placeholder.
Yeah,
that's a deep cut for the homies. So they have a couple of interesting things about them that I've been a big fan of, but crucially, none of what so we have this conception when we come up with races, we think of cornerstones, and actually the cornerstones that we currently have displayed for, say, the Terrans, which includes the fact that they can lift their structures and move around and self-destruct add-ons to clear space, the fact that they have a bunch of units that change form, like of course the Phalanx, formerly the Siege Tank, is one such iconic unit. The fact that they have the damage over time fire from things like the Hurakan, formerly Firebat, that burns armor and deals a little bit of damage over time. And of course, the fact that they can time travel corpses back into service, reclaiming corpses and using them as fighters. These are like iconic, significant, powerful aspects of them that like really define how they play. But, I think at this point, it's probably something that would be worthwhile to put in. One of the other things would be kinetic penetration, right? That's like clearly a cornerstone of Terran. It's unique to them. And so I feel like the Askosi don't have I haven't decided or I haven't divided their cornerstones out into including a sort of like unofficial cornerstone that's about their bullets, their projectiles. And I know that's something that you specifically wanted to talk about, Vic. I don't know if you had any commentary on, having projectile behaviors.
This is one thing that came to my mind when you were talking about the cornerstones, is that I guess it's cool that we have them in Brood War, in CMBW, but my also other reflection is that formalizing them as such a concrete thing, I worry kind of boxes the design a bit. And I don't think this is really a criticism of CMBW, but I feel like for like newer RTSs, it would be cool to experiment with something more freeform, I guess. But yeah, it's just a thought I had, and we don't have to go deep into it.
Sure, yeah. I'll say quickly on that subject, I think the best way to think about it for me is that when I think about mobile operations, that's one of the cornerstone that includes two separate things. It includes you can lift off and land, and you can destruct objects so you don't need anymore that can't be lifted off and landing. And so that's like two ways of executing on that concept of delivering on that cornerstone. And that's like in that way, we keep it vague enough.
That it's not like, I like that it's vague, because that means not only more creativity for the developer, but it also means more won't even name it. Uh, it's more like thematic instead of just being, oh, by the way, we use this ability a bunch. It's more like, oh, this race actually feels like they're turtle and they push and they they crawl into you slowly but surely with a lot of power, right?
Yeah,
Like
and
if
it's like
Corner
the
describes
deployment.
that, that's pretty
Yeah,
epic.
it's like the deployment, which is Masters of None, is like you trade the ability to move for some other expanded ability, either more range and splash, which is what the Phalanx has. The Matador has the flame attack when it's sort of like a front line and gets more armor. The obviously the Cuirass is planned to deploy into trench mode, which is going to allow it to be garrisoned.
Branches.
Yeah, trenches. And so you think about it, it's like, I'm not saying like the distinction between a cornerstone and just a normal passive is that the normal passive can be down to one unit in one context. It says like this unit does this thing in this context. Whereas the cornerstone is supposed to be like this race has the ability to execute on this thematic. And the way that we do it is going to be different. So you think about a polyoid adhesive, like, yes, okay, we have a bunch of units that simply have the flamethrower attack, right? The Huracan, the Matador in Cinder mode, and of course the Durandal. But we also have the Salamander, which now leaves behind fields that apply it. And that's a very different feeling than the flamethrower attack. And so that change not only.
Yeah, I definitely
Go ahead.
like that we went that way with like
Yes.
reusing things in different contexts. I think that definitely
And that is
adds a lot
essentially a
of
cornerstone, right?
depth.
That's why a
Yeah.
polyide adhesive is a cornerstone. And like even kinetic penetration, like, yeah, okay, there's kind of a commonality that maybe makes it feel understandable why it's not on the list of cornerstones. But also, like if you think about all the different contexts of what it is, the fact that the Autocrat has kinetic penetration but no base armor pen, but also has armor rend, maybe you can criticize the concept as overloaded, but that's like a very different execution of the thematic than the Sentinel, which is just one attack, or the Cyprian, which is two attacks. Like there's sort of like different ways to do it. And of
Yeah,
course,
right.
the fact that Reclamation, the 3 units that have it, do it in completely different ways as well, is sort of like a maxim on that as well. It's like, yes, here we are saying,
Yeah, I
like
honestly
this
feel
is how
like
it's
IOs are
deployed.
pretty broken though, but
Probably,
uh
if you're fighting
yeah.
against high value targets, they don't work as well.
Like my like most epic match from Ascension would be over if there was just like one Ion.
Maybe. I
I
would I
think.
won't
What?
I won't hesitate to say that there's definitely going to be some stuff that at like higher levels of play, which hopefully we can unshackle more with the launcher, of course. Touching back on that, I do think that there's going to be some very obvious imbalances that are exposed. We saw that in tier 1 even with like Zerg abusing Protoss, and that's gotten a lot better now. And I think in general the health of the game, it's not just the health of the matchups, but it's like the skill required to pull off certain things is now, I think, better. Maybe there's some overcorrections, like some dispute about stuff like the Vorvacor, but I think looking at it overall, it feels really good to be in a situation where you look at it and you say, like, okay, this game, like now in order to abuse stuff, I have to be a higher skill level, or I have to go deeper into the tech tree. And like that deeper into the tech tree part, the abuse part will be rectified in time when we have more data. So I'm not really worried about it, but it's still, it's very exciting to see the evolution of it, courtesy of the tournaments and the competitive plays, right?
Yeah, that's definitely pretty cool, and yeah, looking forward for it.
So we're talking about the Askosi again. We're mentioning the projectiles, and that was something that you had earmarked out for us to discuss. Is
Yeah. Okay. So let me look at the list again.
yeah,
And there's some things I was thinking is that when we have this new race, there are a few things we can experiment with, and
yep,
some of them are more racial mechanics. Like, how do we already like other races have some standard things that they have defined. So, for example, course mechanics are something that every race has, but
yeah.
very different.
Same for mind
And
control, right?
and then there are other things that I think are more experimental, which is like I was thinking for a long time it would be really cool to have like bullet hellish bullet patterns, because the thing with bullets and movable stuff is that you can actually assign them a lot of complexity and depth without really making it confusing,
Mm-hmm.
because when there's like a missile, you see it with your own eyes and it's like you see what it does when
Right.
it moves, and when it moves in a specific pattern or in a specific, I don't know, maybe like misses targets that escape it quickly enough. That is actually something that even Brood War had to some extent. The bullet behaviors, like with the mutalisk bounds or whatever. And I think it's pretty cool because you don't have to write like a wall of text explaining it. It's just like, oh, you say this bullet goes like zigzag pattern, or like this bullet like curves, or this bullet like splits in like, I don't know, snowflake pattern or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
And you don't have to say like, oh, at this pixel it splits at this angle or whatever. People would just see it, and it's actually something people can learn. And yeah, I feel like those like bullet heavy things are pretty useful, and it's cool to, if we could see more of that with Askosi, and I feel like that would be pretty thematic anyways.
Mhm.
So I'm curious what you think there.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is, as far as bullet hell stuff is concerned, so one of the primary things I wanted to do with the Askosi is give them something where, in order to get the equivalent amount of cost efficiency out of some of their early tier units and maybe general units, like maybe that's actually a thing about the biotic branch that they have. In order to get cost efficiency, they need to have pretty on the point micro, like, or they'll be rewarded further. Another way to think about it is they're rewarded further for micro than they are for just like sort of like a moving, right? Like the Protoss is, you could think of Protoss as a bit more of an a move race. Zerg gets that with certain swarming things, but you still want to maybe position before the fight. Like the way that you execute on attack moves and on like pulling the trigger on certain attacks and getting efficiency out of your units. Yes, even the Protoss do have a lot of benefit from micro, especially thanks to flash shielding. But I'm thinking I want the Askosi to basically be like, I think in particular, mobility and
like,
positioning in the middle, like adjusting their positioning in the middle of fights, that's kind of what I want to dial in on. I want to deliver on the fantasy of these guys that can outplay you through mobility, but you can use certain tools to shut them down. You can think of the Hierophant slow. You can think of Legionnaires surrounding them or whatever. You can think of the, obviously Vorvikor and Snare. You can think of even just like shutting them down with high damage stuff like, oh yeah, I've got some Sentinels on the field or whatever. And now it doesn't really matter where you jump. You're going to get front loaded with damage. So I think stuff like that can be, that's sort of like a core thematic of them. And so I think it synergizes pretty well in theory, or it can in concept, with the bullet hell approach of let's have them just have a lot of bullet driven behaviors, because if it depends on their positioning, which it often does for things like, say, kinetic penetration, for example, or any sort of missile interception attack, then, well, if this is the most mobile race, if this is the race with the most mobile units, then absolutely having the opportunity to reposition in the middle of the fight so that you can better utilize your projectile behaviors and patterns is going to be a huge part of their skill expression. So I think that could be really huge and definitely synergize with what you're talking about.
It's funny you said that Protoss is the easiest race.
Well, I said it was the most a movie race. I don't think that means that it's easiest.
Okay. No, actually, the thing I'm criticizing, I guess, is the A move part, because I feel like actually in CMBW right now, Zerg is the more A movie race, and Protoss actually needs to micro a lot more because their units are less efficient for the cost. I feel like. Especially Leon, maybe doesn't completely not true later, because like if I have 20 architects, I can probably just move anything.
That's sort of what I was thinking more than the
in early game. I feel like it's completely inverse, which is actually kind of interesting if that's just like a phase of the game that they face, because that means the game is more dynamic than most other games, right? But yeah, it's just something that stands out to me from your response. But yeah, I think the mobility part is very interesting, and we'll see how that goes. I think it's definitely very interesting to see a race that is more focused on behaviors, because there will be a lot of opportunity for us to see how we can like express depth from various unit to unit interactions that are more than just like stats, because we'll have a lot of the mobility thing and maybe positional stuff like the bullet things I was suggesting. And those are definitely things that I always wanted to do with like with all my like behavioral design paradigm, where I'm saying like, oh, let's not have armor, let's just have behaviors, and let's have defined unit roles or whatever. It's sort of been my dogma for a while. And yeah, I'm definitely excited to see that take place and see how that works and how well we can execute on the idea.
Yeah, for me, I just think of it like one of the things that I want to do with the way that this thing seems to be going, right, is the way that my concepts for the Askosi are developing are that they use biotic in the early game to try to secure themselves a good, strong advantage when it comes to slamming out, like, essentially like putting pressure on people. But if you've ever tried to hold a rush from somebody, you know that if you hold it, then you usually are having the advantage, right? So my thinking is, if you see a really early pool versus Zerg, you can expect they're probably going to try to send some units at you early on. You can kind of plan for that. I think if you see a early biotic structure, the radix, that is going to be an indication that, okay, they're going to be going for, maybe some early proselytes, which is the infantry that jumps to allies. And that's another thing is that's kind of interesting about their early game, is that when they scout you with the pilgrim, their worker, if there's a pilgrim within jump range of like a cliff, then they can just rally their proselytes to you. And instead of like the Reaper, which just jumps up cliffs in Terran StarCraft 2, they jump to allies. So they have to have the ally there. But you can imagine a world where they jump to that ally and then they're like, suddenly you got some proselytes in your base because you didn't clear out the worker, right? So, you try to scout the Protoss worker in case they're proxying you or something, because, they can just proxy and then walk away, and then suddenly there's like a gateway in your base or whatever. You're going to want to scout out obviously scout out the Mason to see if they're anchor cheesing you or some shit, building a proxy structure that way. You can't you don't really expect a proxy Droleth, but you will probably expect a proxy Pilgrim, not because they're going to try to build a structure there. They might, but it's probably not very likely. Instead, they're going to use it to sort of bridge the gap for otherwise impassable terrain, such that their early infantry can jump in. And so that can be like an opportunity for early raids where they become a lot less threatening from unorthodox angles if you don't have an enemy worker sort of hanging out in your base somewhere. So that's like an interesting, almost like sub-objective or goal of the Askosi player, is keep a worker in your base. And they can if you haven't scouted them yet, you don't know that there's a Radix on the way for them to have the proselytes out. Like suddenly. They're positioning their pilgrim by this corner or whatever. You're like, oh shit, they're going for it. But maybe they're putting down a function, which is their structure for the mechanized stuff. So like, who knows? You can kind of bait around with it, and I think that's pretty cool. Is that
I was thinking about the behavior, and I was thinking that it wouldn't be much different, much worse or whatever, if you just made it jump to any vision you have, and I wonder why not do that.
Because you can get vision without being there. And also the idea behind the behavior is that you're leaping to somebody's aid, or to use it as an extraction tool so that you yourself are not, overwhelmed or something, right?
I just feel like, because if we made it like click on terrain, then they just like group cast correctly and they like split out. And if we make them all jump into one unit, I feel like that would be really bad.
I mean, maybe it's a higher tier option for it or something.
And break, and just feel like that would be very
I think it'll be possible to make it not as bad as you're saying, because we should be able to predict the way they're going, I would imagine.
Well, targeted orders don't work like that, and I don't know we can really circumvent that, but we'll see.
The main thing, that the reason why I would be arguing for that sort of approach is that I think it's more important that they are targeting individual units precisely. That's sort of what I mean by like them getting efficiency out of it. I don't think it's going to be that difficult for the average Askosi player to be doing it, because they won't actually have a crazy amount of, like, proselytes are kind of like, I guess they're kind of like Reapers in the sense that you wouldn't build 100 Reapers, right? Even if you could. You wouldn't build like a lot of them, right? So the infantry that have this behavior are going to be a little bit more on the raid, like the specialized raiding side. They should stay alive long enough. Maybe not with their current stats, but like that's something I'll figure out. There's going to be other units that you would build for like the more backbone type infantry that you can get access to later on.
Well, I guess making a jump to ally makes it a bit less abusable in combat, which is good.
Yeah, that's.
Because
I mean,
then you could just like jump back and.
Yeah, well, you could jump into your own. You give yourself vision at that point, so you can jump to your own vision, which is not ideal.
Well, I guess if we don't want it to be used in combat, we can give it a slight channel, anyways. Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
No, because that kind of goes against the whole mobility angle, right? The whole idea is that they're supposed to be able to snap decision stuff. So,
sure.
I see where you're coming from. It's a fine concern. It's just I think the nature of them being more niche units or more like units that you don't make a lot of is going to help with that.
Sure. I wonder how their unit identity should be placed in terms of stats. If they shouldn't be like high damage, low HP or something, but.
Right now, they're kind of middling on damage. They're 2x4 with 1 armor pin, and they have 4 range, so they have to kind of get close. They have 60 health. That might go up, or maybe they'll get armor. They don't have any armor right now. But, we'll see. They're going to be fairly mobile is the other thing. Their movement speed is going to be faster than... Like, they'll probably be, like, maybe halfway between unstimmed Maverick and stimmed Maverick or something as their base movement speed. So, like, they're going to be pretty fast. And their leap is going to be within 5 range, so 1 more than their weapon range as a comparison. So we'll see how that one goes. And all these numbers are obviously super subject to change. But
if they could also jump on enemies and had melee attack, it would be funny. But I
don't worry. Don't worry. I haven't planned that unit yet, but it is on the way.
Not yet.
Not yet. The only other infantry unit I actually have a concept on for is the Cardinal, which is a melee unit, and it essentially has a recycling aspect to it. So, like, one of the cornerstones of these is the idea that the Askosi can repair. They have like in combat healing essentially, because they don't actually have conventional healing the way that like the Ecclesiast kind of represents that for the Protoss, and so does the. Like it's behavioral healing with shields specifically. That's also the Golem. Zerg just have passive healing when they're out of combat, and that increases while burrowed. And then the Terrans obviously have Cleric Shaman. So instead, the Askosi are going to have like combat healing, a combat-based healing, and then also the idea of recycling corpses for the purposes of healing healing the living using the dead. Essentially, that's what their final cornerstone is called. Destination Scrap World. Specialists can be deployed to recycle the fallen, restoring life and cleansing ailments. I'm not sure about the cleansing ailments part yet. That might be.
I remember there was like some Joe Rogan episode where when they were like talking about some like robot that eats organic stuff.
Yep.
That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah. Absolutely. So,
and I also, when we were talking about the jumping units, I imagined a concept for a mech unit that is like a heavy, fairly slow, like probably heavy walker type.
Okay.
And it can channel to jump to vision in like 7 range maybe. And it stomps the units it jumps on for some damage.
Yeah, that could be interesting. It would definitely, if it's going to be a heavier unit, I would want it to, I definitely would want it to have it be like a channel or something a little bit more effortful, right?
Yeah, I could even like imagine the animation. It would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's just like has those like legs and it like prepares, winds up for the jump, and then it like snaps into the enemies, or into vision. Like you could also use it just to breach cliffs or whatever, rivers maybe. And I think that's actually kind of interesting for a heavy unit that is normally slow to be able to breach, like, because now you have to think of this unit differently. It cannot move fast, it cannot rotate fast, but it can rotate well, because it can rotate you like through the terrain. It doesn't really care about it that much. So I think that unit could be really cool. Just an idea I just had. So.
Yeah, stuff like that is cool. I mean, the going back to the idea of them being the most mobile race overall, there's not really a reason to only limit that to the biotic branch. I guess for the sake of like, you would want some sort of obvious differences and distinctions between if I'm going mech as Askosi, I should be playing this a bit differently than biotic. But we can absolutely have stuff like that where it's their mobility. They still have mobility, but it's limited to like requiring you to manage the unit a little bit more carefully, which really goes back into the idea of what they are all about, what their core philosophy and their core design is and stuff. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is that I forgot to mention this earlier when I was talking about the Pilgrim and like the core idea behind the Askosi. A lot of their structures are going to have way higher time costs, or maybe not way higher, but notably higher time costs. Like the average, I think like if I go to the Ministry here, it's 80 seconds, but I feel like it might even be 75 in game. I haven't actually looked at it in a while. So anyway, okay. That's the time for the Askosi. Their landlock, which is their town center, their basic town center, that is 90 seconds. So already there's going to be some disparity between expanding as an Askosi player and expanding as like some of the other races, right? Like we look at the Nexus, and it is indeed 80 seconds, and so is the Ministry. So 10 more seconds on that doesn't sound like a lot. Maybe it'll even be bigger. And the reason for it is because their workers have shared designs, which is essentially team building. Each additional worker that you put on them increases the construction rate by 15%. Now, I wanted to talk about this because this is actually a potential design pitfall of the whole race. If I don't get this right, if we don't get this right as a sort of like overall designers and community and stuff, the race might just end up being pretty lame, actually. And I'll tell you why. I really don't want it to be a performative passive. I don't want it to be a cornerstone of them that just doesn't really like it. You forcibly must engage with it in order to be competitive. I mean, like in the sense that yes, it's a core aspect of them. I would want you to use it and use it well and be rewarded for using it well. But if it's basically like solved in that there's not really a good reason to, like. Basically, you don't spend more money on the construction because your pilgrims are your workers. So by tasking more workers onto a building, you're already losing out on an opportunity cost of income, right? So what I would want out of this is to have this really deep, interesting idea of like, I can increase the construction rate at the cost of resources by not mining with those extra workers. That is the interaction that I'm trying to look for. So we need to get the numbers right so that there's arguments that make sense at a high enough level for both of these things. And that like, sure, you might have a build order where you specifically use like 2 pilgrims or 3 pilgrims on like this one structure to hit an earlier timing, but then it's sort of like, more of an all-in or more of a risky play because then you have less economy. That would be the ideal situation where there's a push and pull and there's like a good reason to do it and a good reason to not do it. And of course, it has to be scoutable. So, you got to be able to see that the pilgrims are on there if you're paying attention. And that means that interesting mind games like, I can take these pilgrims off when I see your scout coming or whatever. But if you're really attentive, you might notice that like the structure is further along, stuff like that. So I feel like for me, the construction rate thing, that needs to be done very well. Veek is actually on BRB, so... pranked, but that's okay. When he comes back, he'll tell me why he thinks a 5-second limit is actually here. Hi, what's up, dude?
So I wrote flat minus 5 seconds and the reason is that I don't think that would actually be that good immediately, but the idea is that instead of making, because currently the idea is 15% per worker, and I think the problem with that is that for some things it's actually really bad, really low, and you need like 10 workers to, there's not a lot of value for assigning additional workers to, like, barracks or whatever. But then for, like, a pivotal big building or even, like, expansions, it actually matters a lot more.
Yeah, you get diminishing returns on lower absolute values. So if it's, like,
and
50
flat
seconds.
minus 5 seconds is not actually good yet. But it has a better property that it actually just gives you value that where you actually have to assign more workers to harder to build buildings. So I feel like there has to be some other clever scaling thing. And even though that would be more complicated, I think it would be more healthy for the game.
Well, I'll tell you where this does make sense. This could make sense. So the radix, which is their infantry, their biotic production, is 10 seconds more expensive than the stockade, but it's 50 minerals cheaper. So that's a key difference. It's also a little bit less durable. But the main idea that I would look at is looking at the radix. You've got a cheaper structure in terms of resources, but not in terms of time, that you can sort of like spend the extra resources in order to bring it up even faster than the other races. You have that flexibility where your resource costs can be they're generally lower than the other races, and their time costs are generally higher, and you can spend resources effectively because you're spending the opportunity cost of the workers. You can spend those to lower the time costs beyond your other races. So you can spend more effectively on one structure to get it up a lot faster. And that's where I think the push and pull would come in. So the 5 seconds idea is pretty compelling for a couple of reasons. One of them being, I know that if I spend 2 workers on this structure, then it'll be as fast as a stockade. Now, I don't know if
yes, there are problems with this because eventually you reach 0 and you must not do that. And it also has the problem that each additional worker actually kind of gives you more value than the previous one. So I think what you would want is like a formula where they give you flat value in seconds. Like it doesn't scale, because like if you say they construct in plus 15 speed, that actually means it's the inverse of that. Actually, let me calculate that. So that would be 1.15, actually inverted. So 1 divided by 1.5. So 86% of the original value, but it's from the total. So it actually gives you more value on a building like that costs like 100 time cost, and than on a building that costs 50. So what I'm thinking is that what you would instead want is a flat value that diminishes with each worker. So let's say the first worker gives you like 10 minus 10 seconds, and then each gives you like 1 second less or something. So like the first worker actually is just doesn't give you any reduction. It's just like the full. So let's say the barracks is like 50. So with 1 worker you do it in 50. With 2 workers you do it in 40, and with like 3 you do it in 35 maybe, and then maybe I don't know what the exact formula would be. Maybe it would be like.
Well, you're basically talking about like each stack is worth half of the previous, which is, I don't know how you would even write that.
I don't know. That might be too harsh. I'm trying to find like the formula that would have the most desirable properties, and maybe then we can simplify it to something more human readable.
I mean, it could just be that there's a cap on how many workers you can combine. It's like maybe the cap is like 5 or something, or whatever. That's another angle that we could take.
Or maybe it's just like 10 minus 10 for the first worker, and it diminishes down to minus 5 1 by 1. Does that make sense? So it would be first worker gives minus 10 seconds, second gives minus 9, third gives minus 8, and then eventually you have minus 5 for each. I don't know.
Yeah, again, I don't even know how you would write that elegantly so that it's human readable. It would be like 3
I just
lines.
wondered if it would have, like, if we ignore the complexity of explaining it, would it actually have the properties?
No, I feel like that's too much of a reduction, actually. For it's really biased towards lower tier ones, because minus 10 is huge. So
yeah,
that's like, there's going to be some structures that are like 30 seconds, so you're cutting it in by a third.
But then I worry with the minus 5, it's still very useful for like Raxes, but it's not very useful for like, let's say you have 120-second build time and you have 50-second build time. It's much more useful for the 50 seconds build time.
Yeah, so you have to decide how valuable is it to get the structure up, and also like what is the cost efficiency. I don't know if that's really that bad. The other thing though is that you mentioned that it can't like the minus 5 thing has to be done over the scale of the whole building. So like if you pull the worker off early, you can't have the minus 5 just automatically deducted.
Right.
So that has to be done to the building modifier formula we have for things like
There's a problem with this though, because if we have, let's say it's 50 seconds, then if you have 10 workers, you actually insta-build. So you'd actually not have the cost because you'd like instantly build 20.
Yeah, that's why I think there's probably a best having a cap on this.
Yeah, maybe cap is half of the build time or something.
No, I think the cap would probably be 5, because 5 times 5 is 25. There's not going to be a structure that's... I don't think there's going to be a structure, maybe like a static defense structure.
I feel like it's fine to like assign 10 workers to like a big structure and then 5 too smaller or whatever.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know where you would draw the line on an elegant systems way to like what is the cap. You said that it should be you can't reduce it by half of their overall build time. I guess that could be fine. That means that the cap for the radix would be 5, since its build time is 50, and so 5 times 5 is 25. So that would be. I guess the cap would be 6 because the base worker, right? So the base worker is there, and then the cap is of additional team workers is 5.
Curious.
So we have some leads anyway to think about that, but that is something that I think we absolutely need to get right for the whole race, and we need to make it so that it isn't just like it's rote and like you always engage with it the same way. It's solved. Maybe it will eventually be that way anyway, but I really want to make sure that there's like elegant or there's strong arguments. Yeah, I need there to be strong arguments for interacting with it and degrees of interaction. Like, do I use one worker? Do I use 2 workers? Whatever. And also, of course, like the timing of when to do it. Like, I need there to be like really good reasons to consider, like things to consider about it all, because that's how you get that like satisfying aspect of delivering on it. Where when you do it right, it works out really well. And if you just ignore it, then maybe there's like times where you look back at the game and you think, oh, I could have done this a lot better. So, just some things to think about for sure. Yeah. So that kind of covers all the Askosi stuff. Obviously, we are coming up on time here. But we have some questions. I don't know if you had any thoughts. Yeah, go for it.
Because I don't think we actually covered what will be. So I guess you can just give quick answers, but what will be the bounce pattern for them? Because there are different bounce patterns for different races.
Yeah, we essentially have like kinetic and for Terran, the regular bounce, the Zerg bounce, Mutalisk bounce, or whatever for Zerg, although they also have Crushing Tide, which is like a little bit separate.
Yeah, I was proposing a lighting bounce as the initial thing, and I wanted to go deeper into that, but we didn't really have time.
I guess the lightning bounce would kind of be like, has a bounce cap, unlike the Gladius type that the Protoss have, but it's instantaneous travel or near instantaneous. So it's like a very low delay.
Yeah, and then travel to nearest not hit yet unit or something. It would be interesting.
Yeah, I think so. And
then it recurses until in total it hit like enough units.
I'm not sure if it should be allowed to hit the same unit twice.
Yeah.
So, but if we decide to do that, then yeah, it would basically go back to the original target. If it was within range, I don't even know if it would be, because.
And what I mean by recourse is that like if you hit one unit, it also hits from that unit, and it can hit more units.
It searches again from that unit to see if there's any other units. Yeah. That's like how normal bounce. That's what makes it a bounce, basically, right? So.
And okay, so that's one thing, and the other thing I have is mind control and corpse mechanics. For mind control, I was asking if there are new things we can try, or maybe we make a unit with we will make a race without mind control.
So the Askosi have hijacking. It's a biomechanical process where they become the thing that they are interacting with. It's a channel where they attach themselves to it's like gene shit. It's like really wild gene manipulation. So they attach themselves to the thing, and then to whatever they're trying to control. And if the channel is if they're basically they stay alive long enough, they take control of it. I haven't decided. I think that's a
Roselium.
Well, the Askosi have this in Zabalba, so the Roselium part is like more internal cloning or whatever. The thing about the hijacking is it requires more setup than a lot of the other mind controls, and so I'm thinking that whatever hijacks it should probably respawn after the thing is after its hijacked form is destroyed. You know.
Yeah, that's what I did with like Histocore initially, where it like actually when destroying the building, it would emerge back from.
Yeah. So
that was an idea I had once.
So that's essentially how they're gonna take control of
stuff. How is it different from? Oh yeah, this is how it's different. I was thinking that Warcraft 3 had possession, right?
Yeah, the Banshee doesn't get back. Also,
yeah, right.
You can't. I mean, you can attack the Banshee while they're channeling, but the channeling is like. I mean, it's Warcraft 3. How the fuck are you going to kill any unit in 2 seconds? So, I don't know.
I hate how long it takes to kill units in Stormgate. And I'm not sure about Zero Space. I haven't watched much of it, to be honest.
It doesn't look very watchable, but I also haven't seen that much of it. So.
I don't want to hear the fucking unit responses because they're so awful.
Is it true that they're AI generated? I heard something about
I
that.
think so.
I was actually
And
trying
some
to
of them
use
are
it.
like from people that do not even speak the language well, so it's like you
Oh,
can
nice.
see that this is like a coupled together mess.
That's good.
Anyways, uh,
The other one
so
that you
market
had
rules,
was
all position.
corpse. Yeah.
Yeah, course mechanics. What do
So
we do? I actually feel like Vengeful Ascension is something we should probably rework sooner or later because it doesn't really feel that
I like
way.
the idea. I think it was Green Eggs had the idea that since it's so short lived, maybe it should be allowed to stack. I mean, the problem is,
Yeah, all other ones stack and pretty absurdly so.
well, the problem is that if you imagine like how fast your vassals will go when 5 of them die, it's like okay, buddy.
Yes, you
So,
say that, but then also we have ions.
well, we have them as tier 3 and something that is not a mapped out matchup at all.
True. Yeah.
And the vassal is a tier 1 unit that's mineral only. So I don't know. I'm open to the idea of revisiting them. Maybe make the individual stacks matter
Maybe it
less
would be
or whatever.
better because currently the passives are pretty confusing. Maybe it would be better to unify it as just one buff.
It could
which
be,
keeps
yeah.
it both
Uh,
move speed and attack speed.
I am a little bit worried about the idea that like something like the vassal will do that. I do think that will be a huge buff to vassals. Actually, is that when they die, they increase other vassal attack rates. So if you have like a swarm of them, but and especially if we decide to make it stackable. So maybe we start with unification and then go from there. But either way, as far as the Askosi are concerned, the main thing that they're using corpses for is for sustaining on the battlefield. This doesn't really count as a corpse mechanic, but they have this like feature on
Right, yeah.
on their some of their heavy units where they lose mobility, sort of like siege mode or whatever for the phalanx. But it's not willing. It's once they pass
Didn't you
a
say
certain
they
HP threshold.
heal units from consuming corpses?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, right. So that's the thing.
And so they channel that and the frontline reassembly thing, which is the heavy units deploy. They become grounded after sustaining heavy damage. That gives them extra durability. And I might do some more offensive thing about it too. My vision for this is actually that like you can imagine the Askosi battle tanks moving into like a position where your opponent has the natural base up or their third or whatever. And you're deliberately putting them like into harm's way so that they deploy and then become a lot harder to root out while like, you know, they hold off like the reinforcements while you attack the workers with biotics or something. That's like one of the ideas that I had in my head for that. Because you want them to take the damage and then like be a lot harder to kill once they've been grounded. So you want to like use them and commit them to an area where your opponent won't have an easy time sidestepping them because obviously once they're grounded they can just walk around. They essentially become static defense. So it's like an interesting idea. They can be reactivated by the scrap world stuff as well. That's like one of the reasons why I had cleansing ailments in the description of the corpse mechanic is that it'll include if you can basically reactivate your stuff there. So, yeah. So I guess that's pretty much it. Those are the mechanics we got in
I
mind.
wish we had more time because I would want to go in depth in things, but whatever.
It's all good. We can always cover it in the next episode as well.
Yeah, we probably forget, but
Nah,
I was
dude.
essentially thinking that they. Oh, whatever. Actually,
No, just hit me now.
It's too much. It's
Oh,
too much.
Is it
It's
too much? All right.
So-
That's
yeah.
that's the little teaser for the next episode. You know how it goes. So
Yeah. So coffee.
coffee, dude. Can you imagine? We
Thanks for
actually
the
have
support, by the way. It's
Yeah.
really cool to have you guys. And
we get people coming in all the time giving us.
I wish I
moolah.
had more time to just like smash every bounty in existence or whatever, and every request, every question, and do crow's nest every day. But unfortunately, I have to work because this is not
We're not yet
self-sustainable yet.
Yet, yeah.
I hope.
Big yet.
I'd love to quit my job just to do this full time, but
And if you want to make that a reality, you want to help do your part, you can post that money. You can send us that money. And some people have sent us that money, and that includes the Shambler, who asks if you this is a ridiculous question. If you had to add 6 different types of health to Cosmonarchy, including the pre-existing shields and regular health, what would those other health types look like? I don't think we're going to do 6. I think we're going to just talk about what other health types do we think about. And I think I answered a similar question to this on a prototype about like how I feel about like other, stuff that is like not health and not shields. There's like a couple of different things. We technically have like we have like the equivalent of mana barrier for the Azazel, right? So there's like already some things that you can think of that.
Well, there are a ton kinds of health you could do, but I guess all of them are essentially shields anyways.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's
and
not.
I
It
don't
doesn't
think
have
you
to
would
be.
really want to have more than two at the same time on a unit. Maybe three at max. Sometimes I don't know. But when I think about health bars, there are things like decaying health, which just decays. This is a type.
Yeah.
Health that regenerates via lifesteal. Obviously, flesh shielding is one thing. Regeneratable is one thing. Then overshielding is one thing, where healing, you can overheal units up to a cup, and maybe it decays, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, it probably would be like maybe they start off with this barrier and then like only specialists can reapply it or something, right?
And then there's obviously like analog, which like reflects.
Yeah, it's also kind of mana barrier with an
itself,
extra twist. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all just health with extra twists because like on its face it's just health points, and you assign a name to them because they differ from each other, but it's usually not done. Like it doesn't redefine how the number. Well, it does redefine how the number interacts, but it's just like it's not gonna be fundamentally different, really.
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure.
I feel like the main thing that I get out of this question is like the one thing that came to my mind when we were describing it, and like you said, like it's all shields. I guess there's one thing that wouldn't be shields, which is if you have like consumable health or something, like health as a resource. And by that I mean like, or you could do something basically to like cut your max health in half, but like get some sort of bonus.
Oh, here's a cool idea. In a game where in a game without hitscan, essentially, let's accept that premise for a second.
Yeah.
There's health. You take damage to that health. I don't know if that's actually that good. But the idea is that you take damage to the health and the bullet passes through the unit. So maybe you take like half the damage, or maybe it's or maybe you just get a lot of that like ethereal health. So essentially, bullets phase through you, but you still take the damage.
And is that only when you're below a certain amount of it? Like if you...
It's only when you still have that health bar. So if you have health and ethereal health, then essentially... Because then you could imagine where you could give one unit, like, let's say 50 normal health and like, I don't know, 500 ethereal health.
Yeah.
And it will be very tanky, but it will also leak projectiles.
I see.
And maybe you would also... I don't know. I could imagine like behavioral stuff from that where you'd have... I don't know. I guess it depends if allied bullets would also hit you. I guess that would never be the case, but...
It's an idea. It's a thing. That is a different kind of health. Yeah, that's the different. So like again, it's like this health does something different on hit or has some different mechanic associated.
Or I feel like most of those would just be a passive that you put on one unit on a race that has some kind of shields. So
yeah, right.
Is that really an archetype? I don't know. Like if every unit had that, would it be really that useful?
Right. Yeah. Not exactly. So, well, anyway, hopefully Shambler got his money's worth out of that question. So a bizarre one. Yeah. I don't know if you can really have 6 different types, but of course we always invite people who ask us questions to elaborate on what they actually meant or like repost it or whatever. And we'll get to it when we get to it.
Oh yeah. One thing that you could also do is shields that once broken give you like a rage buff or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of something I was playing around with the Keltar conceptually, but we'll see how that one rolls out. You mentioned the word archetype earlier, Veek, and Myrian's question asks, what RTS faction archetypes are y'all most fond of? So Faction archetypes. I guess what I'll say is I really like. I mean, it's pertinent to the Askosi. I really like the idea of the sort of hit and run raider types that maybe they don't have the frontal power until later on in their tech tree in order to deal with like the super powerful stuff that the other races might have, the other factions. But the idea of the Askosi or any sort of you can even think about this in like stock Brood War. Terran often has to like drop versus Protoss in the, if they're in a really disadvantageous position. Obviously they can just do the tried and true mech crawl, but like you can drop in that sense to sort of like, cause your basic units aren't going to be able to compete. You can't use vultures against dragoons, right? So you can't really compete with their basic army as easily. So you try to like split their attention. I like that kind of archetype of these guys are at their best when you're micromanaging across multiple fronts. That sort of thing. So that's my answer as like one of my answers. I'll think about a couple others. I don't know if you have anything, Veek.
Well, I have a digression.
Okay.
Which is why I was thinking about functions. As I was watching a bit of the like campaign thing that the Polish streamer was playing, and that obviously gives. When I'm watching shitty content, it obviously gives me thoughts on how you would improve it.
Absolutely.
And that kind of sparked factions as a thought. And the thing I wish CMBW had is visually distinct factions where they are all like. I remember when I did like the dark recolor for like one map crop for Protoss, and like if each faction, even though their units would be the same, even the units that are the same from other factions had this distinct look, that would really, I feel like, shape the thematic home where you would see where you would feel you're playing a different faction, not only like you would additionally. I mean, feeling is one thing that just comes from gameplay, but you would also like see it, and I feel like that would be a really cool thing.
But so didn't you just say did I mishear you earlier when you said it's the visuals, even if they weren't different functionally, should be different? Because I go the other way. I think if you don't change anything, you shouldn't change the visuals because it's actually like kind of a lie.
But
like StarCraft 2 is really obvious for this because they have all the war chest skins and then they have all of like the different stuff where it's like here's the Death's Head Reaper, but it does fucking nothing different than the normal Reaper. So I guess the Death's Head was a mercenary Reaper. But there's like some Reaper skin.
Well, maybe But the deeper thought I had is it would be really cool to explore like an RTS game where you have like few races and then all of them have like few factions that are like similar but different, and where they would be like this, like when you have humans, you obviously don't. Not all humans fight the same, and they have like different weapons and different things.
Yeah, sure.
So I feel like exploring that would be cool. And yeah, you're probably right that having units be very, I don't know,
reskinned, right?
I feel like, I feel like it would be really cool to have like visually know when you see a unit. Like when you see their army, it would be really nice if you immediately knew that, oh, they come from like this region of the world, so they color their units this way or whatever, or they use this kind of metal.
Yeah.
So it would be more like textures changing instead of the unit. Like I wouldn't want the zealot to look like a fucking clown or whatever, just because the faction is led by Ahmed. But I don't know. I feel like it would be cool to sell the aesthetic of a faction.
Yeah, I almost feel like you can do that with like a special shader on the player color or something. Because the player color is supposed to be...
Does that sell the idea for you, or still no?
Oh, I feel like you should look for something that is like player color, right? Because player color already accomplishes this is what differentiates units on the battlefield that are the same graphic otherwise. If we can make that player color have a different like pearlescence or reflective property or something without it being too distracting and stuff, that might be something to explore. Because then it's like, that makes more sense. But if you're talking about having races that are similar but different, I think you can have, if you have like less than 40 fucking units per race or whatever, you can have a sub-faction that totally replaces every unit, but is still very similar. You do get into a weird territory where it might be like change for the sake of change. And maybe that's the argument for like, okay, their SCV equivalent is like the same, but has like the different material property on the player color or something, like with a custom shader.
Well, what could be cool is even like, oh, you have the same unit, but they filled it with a different weapon.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah,
kind of
that-
changes how it works, and it fits more with
I don't know if
different
you would
mapping.
even keep the same name, but like, yeah, it might
Yeah,
be.
probably.
It would be very visually the same. Like something that I've been doing a lot lately is I've been kit bashing models for these factions, and I'm working on an adherent model, which is the Sacred Saber replacement for the Legionnaire. And I've taken the Legionnaire graphic itself and reshaped its armor and adjusted a lot of other details about it and given it a great sword instead of a lance, which is actually kind of placeholder because I want to go back to like the zealot look where they have it mounted on their wrists. But anyway, I'll probably give it like a mounted shield and a mounted saber, a wrist-mounted saber or something like that. That'll be a very different look. But that's for later when I know what I'm doing more, or maybe Solstice might do that himself later from that pitch. But the idea that I have for the adherent is that like I'm basically taking a Legionnaire and like giving it better armor and a different weapon, and scaling it up so that it's like a taller unit. And then I made its like nerve cords longer as well to sort of signify that it's like maybe been around longer because it's not dying so fast like all the Legionnaires are. So that's kind of like the same unit but different with different equipment. That's sort of like I think what you're going for, and I think we could do a game where all of the units in a faction were like that. Like a riff, a meditation on that unit, but like something specifically bespoke to this faction. I don't know if you could also count workers in that, but I think with our focus on like one of the things that is sort of like a digression from this, but I don't have time to talk about in depth, but having the idea of the faction, so we have like these advanced workers, and we're going to specialize these advanced workers instead of them being sort of like just pseudo upgrades over the base worker. And some of them might not even mine, and some of them might not even build, and just be really good at mining or something like that, right? But like the idea is that they kind of fulfill a general aspect of the worker archetype, but they're more specialized. So like if that's the case, then you can even have the advanced workers be factional and be different. Like the Hikatan Coalition might have like a fast miner because they or like a tanky miner because they kept like getting annihilated by Zerg raids or something. So they have like a miner that maybe actually
that's pretty cool.
Has more armor and maybe moves slower but harvests more. I never really like the idea of like fucking with the harvest rate or the harvest amount, but like that might be one thing that I think about doing. I don't know. That's probably going to replace the Talos for them. The Talos is like the default one, but like maybe the Hikatan one will be a grounded like heavy armor type worker. And maybe it has like a ranged passive attack or something, like the Durandal autogun or some shit. I don't know. Who knows what it'll be? But like that's like one example, right? And so I think having the idea of them being, as long as the unit itself can be riffed on, so like probably isn't the basic worker. But I mean, you can't even say like you can't even riff on the Maverick because the Hikatans replace the Maverick with the Hotshot. So I am already okay with riffing on even those concepts, and I think it's totally valid to do. I don't know what kind of game we would make for it. I don't know if that would be a game that we would want to make. But I'm not against the idea. It's just I think you have to make sure to do it without, without like sacrificing the idea that what you see matters for what the thing is. And if something is very distinctly visually different, then like so as you can't just call it like, oh, that's a player color change. Then that's drawing my attention that this is a different unit, so it should probably do something differently. That's like my main complaint about the idea of essentially like the StarCraft 2 reskin.
I feel
thing,
like
right?
the silhouette is kind of what brings my brain to associate unit behaviors, but
and animations, right?
I
the animations.
It's something. If we tried that, is we would want to like iterate and see where it goes and how it feels. Anyways, the next question is from Kian.
That's right.
And it's, what is your level of engagement with philosophy? Are there any...
Wait, well, you're in the wrong one, bro. That's prototype.
Oh, no.
It is from 3 Crow.
That's actually... I wanted that. Cool.
Well, ask him to ask it for the next Crow's Nest.
You have to ask this.
Yes. 3 Crow actually asks, can you go over the Zabalba regencies and discuss any ideas you have about the regencies that are different or similar and how you would meet in the middle on those ideas? This is kind of interesting because this question is probably best served for the next episode when we talk about this. Maybe. So what do you think? Shall we just answer the philosophy one instead?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see. 3Crow will get you. We'll get that question for you on the topical, relevant one, which is next. So instead, we'll answer a question you asked only me, which is totally fine because I'm sure you're interested in what Vika has to say too. Where was it?
Can you like reiterate what you said on prototype, because I don't think I've heard it.
I haven't recorded this episode yet.
Oh, okay. So I definitely engage with. I mean, I've actually engaged with some of that. I don't remember all of it, but definitely the thing that influenced me the most was Stoicism. Like, I'm sure it
Yeah.
influenced you as well. And I think it's pretty modernly pragmatic philosophy, because I've engaged with like philosophy, or like which is like asking if you really exist or whatever, or like I think therefore I am or whatever, and I feel like that's not very pragmatic. It's not very useful to think those things, and it's actually like mental masturbation or whatever. And like, okay, if you can't prove something, it's, I don't know, it's not that useful as a thing. But then Stoicism is pretty pragmatic, where it like tells you how to handle situations better and how to be a better man and stuff like that. So I think it's pretty based.
Yeah, I've also been. I'm trying to quickly grab the YouTube channel here. It's not really like a concrete philosophy, but I absolutely will recommend it. Let's see here. Yes, Dry Creek Wrangler School. Now that sounds like a good time, doesn't it? He just recently got 1 million subs on his channel. He's like this old-fashioned guy from Wyoming, a man's man.
Yeah, I watched few of his
Oh, you already have watched it. You know
videos.
him. Okay. He's really cool.
Few times.
Yeah, he's got some really cool videos about like sort of what it means to be a man, or like how to have a balanced life and stuff. And listen, if you're open to that sort of thing, you're open to it. I've gotten a lot of reinforcement on things that I kind of already believed, but I didn't know deeply enough to articulate it the way that he knows, and because I haven't lived his life, and he's a guy who's clearly a lot more pertinent there. So
Actually,
it's just a
something
lot
I
more experience.
realized lately is that my exposure to like religion was pretty bad. Where I guess it's generally a thing nowadays. Where like with Christianity, I feel like a lot of the modern Christianity kind of misses the point, and it's like you're like supposed to fear God or whatever, and it's like all very superficial. I feel
Yeah.
like, and not very pragmatic. But when you actually like think about like what the Bible says or whatever,
Hmm.
it's actually kind of useful, because you can often see where it's like tells you to be like more disciplined or whatever, more
More honest, right?
wholehearted or
Yeah.
whatever, and it's a lot of it is pretty actually based or whatever, and
Yep. Yeah.
instead of being like the modern schools of thought, which is like LGBTQ or whatever, which is really really stupid and actually evil, I'd say. It's
It seems to be
yeah.
more focused on dividing than uniting. Whereas, ironically, if you go back to, if you actually read the Bible, you'll, even as somebody who I would say I don't have a religious belief per se, like I don't actively pray or believe in a God per se, but I do recognize that I don't know. I don't have all the answers. So whatever God is, I'm not. I'm not that. Except when it comes to game
Yeah,
design,
I find
obviously.
it pretty interesting, because and it's really interpretation based, and I
Yeah.
don't know if I really like believe it in a way where it like usually is told to you, and I don't really pray or whatever,
Yeah.
but I feel like you can interpret it in a lot of ways. One
Yeah.
of it is like, oh, there's like this universe that exists, and it like emerges from all those like atoms or whatever, and is really fucking impossible. And even if God didn't create it or whatever, it's like that fucking emergence is kind of like you could imagine this as God or whatever.
Yeah. Well,
That
it's
is
beyond
kind
our
of
understanding. So yeah.
interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't, if it doesn't exist, there you can think of that like that. And there's also the pragmatic thing. Is like you can think about that. Like either motivationally or whatever, where you can um see this like as a personification of good or whatever, and you can strive to uphold those values because they tend to create good, even though it isn't a physical thing. Like if God doesn't physically exist, it doesn't mean it's not useful to like believe in the values that he represents or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to see it in that way, I think. And I'm not necessarily saying like it exists or it doesn't. I don't know myself either. And I used to believe it doesn't. He doesn't. So, but it's useful to see it that way, I think.
I think so too. Yeah, it
It's
comes back to
useful
what is.
to look at it deeply.
Yeah, I would say it comes back to what you mentioned earlier. That basically you were talking about what is a good or useful utilitarian approach to it, and that's like actually practical, right? And that's I think that's true of Stoicism as well, obviously. And so, like I would say, just go back to like the actual texts themselves. Like I'm going to pick up a copy of Meditations finally, and actually read it myself instead of it can be helpful to get other people to sort of go through it and tell you
Yeah,
about it and sort of
Marcus Aurelius.
yeah. It can be helpful to
Cool
get
guy.
people to distill down the essence of it, but you also want to have your own sophistication level and be able to come up with your own ideas, even if it means rereading it a bunch of times or whatever, because it might be, there might be too much importance in it. And I would say the same thing is true about the Bible. I dismissed it out of hand. I thought religious people were crazy. And then like over time, I realized that it was just the religious people in my area were crazy or the ones that I had interacted with were crazy. And that, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
It's also when you see people around the world start to know, like, atheists being, like, actively evil and
yeah.
nihilistic. And, I mean, nihilism itself doesn't have to be bad, but usually people who just, like, less intelligent, nihilistic people are not good for the world.
I would say it's actually
yeah.
worse if you're more intelligent because you can be more persuasive in your nihilism. And that is like the difference between unwitting, evil, if you want to call it that, and like I would say bona fide evil, where you are actively saying like.
Well, it depends how. Huh. It would be an interesting topic of discussion, definitely, but I'm not sure. Because I thought of myself as nihilist for a while, and I don't know I was particularly harmful to people. It's just like I didn't really care if there was a thing. I think it's more pragmatic to believe in something and in some values, and it's good to.
Well,
know
I
what
guess it
your
depends on what
values
you mean
are,
exactly
but
by nihilism. Because in my head, I'm thinking of someone who actively goes, like, even if it's in theory privately into their own life, it's still going to affect how they treat other people and interact with other people. So when they actively profess to themselves that nothing matters, that's what nihilism is to me. And that means that you're not going to take any interaction that you have with other people in good conscience. You're not going to provide, you're not going to do your best in that sense, right? That's sort of what I think of this.
yeah,
So,
you're essentially. I feel like it's more psychopathy or sociopathy. I'm not sure which one, but
I confuse the two all the time too.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyways,
very interesting tangent.
Time to wrap this up.
Yeah, I think so. So that brings us to the show outro. I like this conversation, dude. It was really cool. I think you had some good input on the Askosi stuff, particularly like the team building. I think we can get closer to something that is better. Like my 15% thing is not a hard rule. It was just something that I came up with as 25% and 20% is going to be too much. 10% will be too little. Let's try 15%. But like what you're talking about is something that's more sensible, right?
I am definitely more careful with flat numbers because like with the whole armor thing, I never really liked the flat interactions where like suddenly the number means way more the lower you get and way less the higher you get.
Yeah.
And that is something to have to be careful about. But then there's also percentages like the opposite spectrum where it is really not that impactful. Like you have to be careful to not be too impactful for when there are big numbers and not
useless when it's small numbers, right? So
yeah.
So that's like a big conundrum for me is figuring that out. And I think even if we don't end up going with either of our solutions, we come up with something else, or we go with one or the other. We'll still have a better and stronger understanding of it because of that conversation, because of our collaboration on it, which is really cool. And of course, we will be getting to more about our collaboration together as time proceeds for the next episode, which will probably be done next week. We will try that out. Thank you for your questions, guys. Thank you for the support financially. And we will continue to be back with some very exciting news once this launcher is done. We have more content out there and all that stuff. So stay tuned, man. And thanks again for joining me, Vic.
Yeah. Thank you too.